Hello and welcome to Console Shock, Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev, but actually not with Stu today because he's on holiday. And instead, we've got our other semi-regular co-host, Al, is joining us today. So thanks for jumping in. Obviously, it would have been three of us today, but it's just me and you today. That's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, and I'm most certainly not on holiday, but the weather outside, it makes me wish that I was, so...
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be recording this, really, if you're on holiday, right? So, as Stu has obviously proven.
Yes,
yeah.
Do not blame him in the slightest. Hopefully he's having a good time. Where's he gone? Do we know?
Actually, you know what? I don't think I asked him. How rude of me. It's probably in like a chat somewhere where he said he's going on holiday, and I just ignored it because he's betrayed us by going on holiday instead of recording a video, recording an audio podcast. So how dare he do that? I didn't ask him. I didn't actually ask him.
I'd love if you just looked in your back garden and suddenly there's a tent there that wasn't there before.
That's been very disturbing.
Yeah. Heavy
breathing going on in the background. Yeah, that would be disturbing. That's a thought we don't want to really dwell on, is it, too much? At the beginning of the show. Stu's on holiday. It's me and Al today. We have got a topic that obviously we're going to talk about with the three of us, but it actually just works fine with just me and Al. There's for very specific reasons, in fact. But just to sort of warm us up like we always do on the show, what have you been up to, Al, in terms of, video gaming, whether it's old stuff, new stuff? What have you been up to?
I've been getting into Star Trek: The Customizable card game again. It's a physical card game that came out in '94, so around the time of Magic: The Gathering. One of its earliest competitors. And I've collected this since it came out, but I've never really gotten into playing it, mainly because when I started out, the random card selection wasn't great, so I didn't even have enough cards to even play a game. And as time has gone on, it's just something that I've never really gotten into. So I've started doing it recently, getting my head into how to play it. And there's a couple of ways of playing it online. There's the Tabletop Simulator, where somebody's made a mod for it, which physically looks good because it's in a 3D environment, but importing card sets isn't really something you can do, so organizing a deck is complicated. A couple of friends and I have been playing on Lackey CCG, a very old app. It's not been updated in a while. It looks very janky, to say the least, but it works really well. And there's a whole website where you can import decks from...
So are you playing people like online? Is that other people that you can sort of connect with and play online, the online version of the card game? Oh, cool.
That's it, yeah. So people have just made it as like a free plugin.
That's awesome.
So you've got access to not only just every card that Decipher ever made, the company behind it, but also the a whole host of virtual cards that have been made by the community ever since the game finished its run.
Well, that's pretty cool. If they've kept that alive like that, especially online.
That's it.
So I think the only card game I've played online, there's an online version of Cards Against Humanity. But it's not actually made by the cards people, and it's not actually called Cards Against Humanity. It is literally the same game. I know Cards Against Humanity is like a weird, like open source game. I think card game.
There's a few knockoffs of it for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them are themed. There's probably a Star Trek one. But yeah, it's called like Are You Zizzy is the online version, but it's really works great. You can invite just a basic kind of website. You set up your own username for yourself. You haven't got to sign up to anything, I don't think. You just set a username up, you create a room, and then invite a bunch of people into that room. I think up to like 7 or 8 or something, and you just play Cards Against Humanity. And it's really easy, low-key, done in your browser. It's great for just a little party game. Played it a lot during the lockdown when, we couldn't really see anyone. So, yeah, that's the only time. Obviously, we've mentioned it on the show before. We both do the Star Trek podcast. We're both big Star Trek fans. I never really got into any of the physical sort of games or anything. There was like the legendary sort of VHS Star Trek Next Generation game, wasn't there?
Yes.
Yes.
Who made you experience beach and things. Yeah.
Yeah.
That will be something we'll have to talk about on short range sensors.
Oh, we will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. But anyway, we don't want to turn this completely into an
No.
episode of long range sensors because it will happen if we don't keep it in check.
Absolutely. So what have you been playing then?
What have I been playing? It's actually a weird one. Last time you were on, which wasn't that long ago, we were talking about the Steam Deck and how, in many ways, and I think I probably said sort of completely, has kind of made my Nintendo Switch kind of irrelevant. But over the weekend, really, I've just massively got back into it because of one game that I've had sat on the shelf for a long time, but I just got a weird craving to play it. I actually got back into Zelda Breath of the Wild. Or as some people call it, the Zelda Scrolls Morrowind. I got it. I got a Switch originally, the standard Switch. When it came, well, not exactly when it came out, not the day it came out, but it was about a month after the launch, so sort of April, May 2017. It came out in March 2017, of course, originally, and I got Breath of the Wild with it. And I think I played about 2 hours. And I think I remember getting annoyed because there's lots of things in there, like there's weapon durability where you can only use a weapon so many times before it breaks. You've got things like stamina bars. So climbing a cliff, you've got a little bar that will die out eventually, and you'll just fall off the cliff and die. If you try and swim a lot, if you've got a limited amount of stamina, you'll run out and you'll die. So you have to be very tactical with what you do. You get used to it. It's not a deal breaker, but I think the first time I played it, it pissed me off. And I think the exact point I did get pissed off was when there was a particular part of the opening kind of few missions where you have to go to a cold part of the Hyrule world map. And when you get there, you start dying of cold. And I don't think I worked out the fact that you can just light a torch and hold it, and that will keep you warm. And you can get clothes and stuff, and there's ways around it. But and I just thought I just kind of got that far, and I got annoyed with all that stuff, and I just stopped. So I mean, have you played that at all? Have you had a go at that?
Yeah, I got it when it first came out as well. I got most of the way through. I nearly completed it, and I never actually did finish it. Life just kind of got in the way. Some of the things that you've just described, they annoyed me at first because it was so different. But at the same time, I started to appreciate it because, especially with the weapons, because it makes you try out other weapons and it makes you think a little bit more about that. Whereas a lot of games, you find the weapon that you enjoy and you pretty much just stick with it. You may get more powerful ones, but if you've already got a favorite, you pretty much just stick to that. Whereas
you kind of realize that there's a lot dotted around. There's a lot of weapons dotted around. If you're one, you're very rarely left without a choice.
Yes, absolutely. But I've been meaning to get back into it. But part of it is it's been so long since I've played it that it's like, can I remember even where the hell I was up to? Because that is quite overwhelming for me because there's a lot of stuff that I've done. There's still bits that I need to do, and I have no idea where the hell I'm at right now. It's like, well, maybe it's just easier if I start again, but I put in a lot of hours to the game originally, and do I want to go and retread the whole thing? And do I have time? That goes on. So I keep meaning to. It's just pushing myself to go, okay, let's just see where I'm up to and just see how we go.
Yeah, it was intimidating for me as well because the save when I actually launched the game, it was from 2017. And I was like, oh my God, that was how long ago. So I felt that I might have played it since then, but I literally hadn't. I mean, I love the Switch. It's one of my favorite consoles of all time. It's my favorite of the current / last generation. I kind of landed in between the two, but it's my favorite. And I've played a ton of games on it. I've got I've built up a collection of nearly 100 games over the years, and tons that are actually download only. But I think what it was, I played. I got into this sort of action RPG open world with really Skyrim, I would say, and I kind of over many years, I eventually completed that. And that kind of warmed me up to it. And then one time I just thought, you know what? I'm going to play Oblivion, the previous game. in the Elder Scrolls, and that I absolutely rinsed through. I went nuts on that. I just got really addicted to it. And I think over the course of I mean, also, I don't mean like a weekend, but for me, it was like over a couple of months, playing it for hours on end. When I had evenings I could dedicate to it. So that warmed me up even more to open world action RPGs. The Elder Scrolls aren't like Breath of the Wild. You don't have weapon. Well, you do have weapon durability, but you can probably complete the campaign with the same sword you started with. Not that you'd want to. There's better ones, but yeah, there's very low key weapon durability. But there's no issues with walking around in a cold climate. You can walk around a cold climate in your underpants and you won't die. It kind of looks funny, but and you won't want to do that. You probably want some armor. But yeah, it's a lot more. There's no real. There is like an endurance bar and like a stamina bar, but they don't really stop you from doing anything. So that made me appreciate open world games even more. So I thought, for some reason, it clicked in my head in the last few days. Maybe I should jump back into Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
So I did, and I just went nuts. And I've done about 15 odd hours in it now. And I just I got used to, having to get new weapons. It's not a big deal. It wasn't really annoying me as much. And I just love walking around in the giant world. It just craps all over the Elder Scrolls, the last two in terms of how it looks. I know it's not going for a photorealism, but it looks absolutely beautiful with the blades of grass and the wind and everything. And I just enjoyed traversing the landscape. I know some people would also say, well, there's loads of enemies that can like one hit kill you, and that's annoying when you're just trying to get somewhere. Well, just just walk around them or just avoid them. Obviously you kind of make sure you go into as many shrines as you can so you can build up your hearts and your stamina. To be honest, I found if you've only got a couple of stamina rings, that's probably going to cover you for any kind of climbing or swimming you're ever going to want to do, really. So make sure you just kind of prioritize that in the early going. And yeah, I'm just like really, really enjoying it. I don't know if I'm going to be clinging to it to the point where I could actually just get through the campaign. I tend to have a tendency to get bored, and even if it's a game that I like, I just want to play something else. I got my Sega Saturn out in the last week, and I might end up diving back into that. But yeah, really enjoyed it. And Al, like I had the same thing where would I be able to get you hang of the controls? Will I get too frustrated? It was been so long since I played it, and I was able to get the hang of things within half an hour. I would recommend you giving it a go. So please, definitely do if you have a loose end one evening. And was it the Switch version that you had?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got some of the amiibo when it came out as well.
Oh, cool.
Sort of scan in to unlock things too. So I've got Link and Zelda. I've got both of them.
That's cool. Yeah.
They do some figurines as well, the amiibo.
I think so, yeah. Well, I know you could get like... was there a limited edition of the game that came with a statue that was an amiibo? I can't remember. Was it just, I think it was just a statue?
It's one of the big crab-like octopus type creatures that's constantly stomping around.
Yeah. I don't have any amiibo. I've never actually been tempted to get any.
Yeah, I've got a small number of them, not many. Just those two, Mario, Luigi, and Sonic the Hedgehog.
They look very cool. They're really nicely designed, and they look really nice and solid. I don't think. I mean, are they fairly cheap to feel, or do you feel they're quite solid?
They're quite solid. Yeah, I mean, just as display pieces alone, they're up there with any other displays that I've had.
Yeah,
any kind of figurines and things. So yeah, they're really well done, and just the fact that you've got this ability to unlock things is kind of neat. It was an interesting time because there was not just Amiibo, there was also Disney were doing a lot of stuff like that as well.
Oh yeah, Skylanders.
Yeah, and just trying to, I think part of the worry was everything going digital. Let's still have something that's physical.
Yeah,
I think was a big part of that. And
yeah, that's right.
It's not really something that I feel has lasted. It's still an interesting premise.
Yeah, I think the Amiibos are still going. I think there's still a steady flow of them, isn't there? But I think all the others have completely died. Skylanders was like the original. I think there was Lego Dimensions, which my girlfriend got into a little bit because you got cool little Lego play sets that you plugged into like an Xbox One or a PS4. Don't think that lasted into
for like Ghostbusters and Back to the Future.
Gremlins and
Doctor Who as well. They did a Doctor Who one too. And I
yes,
think
yeah.
didn't they do some of the Star Wars as well? I think they might have incorporated that into it. I mean, obviously they've had Lego Star Wars. I can't remember if they did the those.
They did
Those
Sonic the
Lego-
Hedgehog. It was kind of the first Lego Sonic the Hedgehog. I know
really?
there's now kind of a playset now, but Dimensions had a Sonic. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
And
Dimensions, yeah.
yeah, the Gremlins was kind of cool because there wasn't ever any separate Gremlins stuff. I don't think that Lego made. It was just for that game. There was like a Gizmo minifig that was with the game. So I think we've got a couple of them. Like my girlfriend got into it a little bit and played it on the Xbox One. And yeah, you plugged a little MacGuffin into it that you sort of use the figures with to unlock stuff and do little cool things. So that seemed probably the best one, really, because Lego kind of lent itself to it. But that's disappeared as well now. Yeah, it's just Amiibo. I think it's the last man standing. And I've been tempted to get some of them because they're so broad with the franchises, video game stuff, that they now have an Amiibo of. It's not just Nintendo. You've got like, Street Fighter characters, and I really want to get like Simon Belmont from Castlevania. He's got an Amiibo. I never got around to it, but I think there's like Solid Snake as well from Metal Gear Solid. Basically, the Smash Brothers sort of characters, which is also huge. So yeah, I've never really been tempted, but they're fairly cheap. I think around. I think here a lot of places like CEX have them, and they're about £10. I think certain characters are a bit more expensive, but no, I've never really got into it myself. But maybe I shouldn't. It could be dangerous.
That's the thing. The moment you start getting to those, especially if they're discontinued and become collectible, then gonna be a bit more expensive.
It's
Although
a
it's
slippery
always weird how
slope.
prices kind of flow and change with all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah, I think the standard price is like £15 in the UK. I don't know what it is in Canada. Probably similar amount in Canadian dollars. But I think that when they come off though the sort of the retail shelf and they go into the collector market, that's when the prices go nuts. And I don't know what the most collectible ones are, but I'm sure there are some that are limited edition, and there's like pixel art Mario figures and things like that only came with like certain Wii U games, or even like a Wii U console. I think bundle came with a certain Amiibo, and Nintendo is.
They did some classic ones as well, like the Game and Watch guy and the robot that they had with the original Nintendo, whose name I'm forgetting. Rob the robot.
Rob, yep.
Yeah.
It's very cool. Well, it's kind of good that we've kind of got on that subject of Nintendo, because we're going to be talking, foreshadowing, we're going to be talking a little bit about Nintendo, well, a lot about Nintendo now, particularly one Nintendo device, especially, and that is the Game Boy. So we have touched upon, we had a dedicated episode about the original DMG Game Boy, although that was a long time ago now, like 5 or 6 years back. And we've touched upon it in little bits and pieces when we've talked about, just generally talking about video games. You're going to talk about the Game Boy. But one cool thing that's emerged over the last, I would say, certainly 10, 15 years, probably going further back than that, actually, is Game Boy modding. So I've got a little bit of personal experience with this, just to, start off. There was a company in the UK called Deadpan Robot, who sell modded Game Boys and will mod your Game Boy if you send it in. So I've got a little collection of Game Boys. I've got about 7 or 8 of them, pockets and pockets and DMGs. So I sent a couple of each of my favorites out of the pocket and the regular size, and just sent them into Deadpan Robot, and they basically backlit the screen for me and just biverted the screen. So I've got a really nice crisp, backlit screen on both of them. Didn't add any other MacGuffins in there. You can put like audio file stuff and, special battery packs and things. It's pretty much stock apart from the screen. And it's really cool. Couple that with an Everdrive, and you've got like a great Game Boy experience. I know some people would argue, well, just use an Advance for Game Boy, but you can't beat playing on the original device, especially if you can get through. Probably the biggest issue was not being able to play at night. And now we can get around that. But also, you mod Game Boys. You actually do it yourself, though.
Yes. Yeah.
So what kind of got you turned on to that? Where did you start with that?
There was a YouTube channel, and I forget the name of it. I'm gonna have to look it up. Um, but it's a guy who just wears a set of black gloves and he just goes through and just restores a ton of stuff. Like, so a Game Boy was the
Yeah.
first thing that I ever saw him do, but he's done other consoles. Like he did the NES Advance, the NES Advantage joystick controller. It was
Oh,
like an
cool. Yeah.
arcade stick. He's done like original PlayStation, all that kind of stuff, and he's done a few other non-tech things as well. But just seeing that
What do
kind
you
of
mean
restoration,
he did like the NES Advantage? You mean he restored a NES Advantage?
yeah. So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah,
yellowed to sin. Some of
yeah,
the buttons didn't work, and so he opened it up, completely stripped it apart, resoldered parts. He used retro brighting to try and restore the original color, and it
yeah.
looked brand new at the end of it and functioned
Oh,
absolutely
wow.
fine. And nothing's there's no dialogue; it's all subtitles. And I think it's because I don't believe he's a native English speaker, but also it's just a fun style. And he's got a little rubber ducky that he often brings in from time to time. If he's cleaning stuff, he'll clean the little duck as well. So
That sounds cool.
and it was just fun and Odd Tinkering. That's the name of the channel.
Oh,
And
right. I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, it's just well presented, brilliantly shot. I just thought it was a really good kind of fun thing to see. So I started watching a few more of these things and thinking, you know what, I've dabbled in computer repairs for a while, and this is something completely different. I've always wanted to know how to solder. That was always something that I always wanted to do as a kid, watching all sorts of sci-fi shows and films, like whether it's Back to the Future or whatever other 80s sci-fi stuff, to
Yeah.
sliders with Mallory working on the timer. I just thought that's something I always wanted to do. But when I was a kid growing up, there was nowhere nearby that sold supplies. There was no Radio Shack in the UK,
No.
certainly not in the north, and there just wasn't the resources either. YouTube didn't exist, so how am I supposed to even learn? And so here I am watching this channel, just thinking, you know what, I could learn this. I could teach myself. And so I ended up buying some basic gear. I went on the premise that of Adam Savage, his advice, which is get the cheapest tool that does the job. And if you find that you can master that, then get the best one you can afford.
Yeah.
Rather than
Yeah.
buying something expensive to find you either don't like it or it's just, or anything like that. So I
Good
just
advice.
So I just bought a load of equipment, very basic, and got myself some soldering test kits. Practice kits, which teach you how to solder various components. They have you desolder and resolder parts and stuff, and really actually quite insightful. And then I moved on to doing the actual Game Boy stuff, and so I've been slowly doing it. It's one of those things where I've been trying to just take myself at a slow pace so that when winter hits and I'm just snowed in because I'm in Canada, I'll be able to just spend all my cold winter nights doing all this stuff.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, and it's fun just kind of restoring these things which are decades old, and just bringing back a bit more life to them. It's quite satisfying, really.
Yeah, it's something that I've been, I've never been brave enough to actually dive into it. But when you collect old consoles, they do fail and they have failure points. And the classic thing that, is always not just actually old games consoles, but computers as well. I mean, I think we're both into kind of retro computing generally. I've got a lot of old Macintosh computers. I mean, there's one, I've got a Macintosh SE. And that needs the capacitors replaced on it. And it's not, it's something that potentially, I would have to pay someone to do at this point in time. But then you're looking at finding someone that has the know-how in that particular kind of work, not just a general, someone that's into the console or, electronics in a general way. You probably would want someone that's got experience with that sort of device. And there's like my Turbo Express handheld. They're famous for having bad capacitors, and the one that I use, the capacitors are failing, and it manifests in really low sound coming out of the speaker, and the display takes forever to warm up. and ultimately the caps are just going to completely die.
Yeah,
And I've watched, yeah,
it was a big thing on the Sega Game Gear as well. I've got a friend of mine. She
yes,
just pulled hers out of storage for a long time. Really excited. She was filming it as she was turning it on just to show me, and then the light would just kind of flicker on, and then the whole thing was shut off. And I'm pretty sure that
yeah.
that's probably the capacitors that are blown on there as well. So she's going to be coming to visit some point later in the year. So I'm going to order some spare capacitors, like some replacement ones, and then when she's here, we'll see if we can just get it going again, which will be kind of fun because this is
That
her
is cool.
childhood one. You know, it's not one that she's just kind of picked up recently. This is the one she grew up with when she was younger. So to help restore that, I think would be quite nice, really.
So what do you do? What is your typical sort of thing that you mod, like when it comes to Game Boys? Is it to put is it just to replace like capacitors and just make sure it just works and just keeping it sort of stock, or do you actually try and put any upgrades in?
I've been doing a mix. So my very first one, I wanted to just restore and have it just completely original for the most part. And I remember actually looking for a suitable donor, and a lot of the ones that I was seeing that were a bit more affordable were ones that had lines on the display. And it's like, oh, but if the display's broken, I'm not going to do that. And then I woke up in the middle of the night and just thought, hang on, what even causes that? And I found out what causes the lines to appear.
Or is that the ribbon?
Yeah, it starts to separate from the board. So what you do is you get a soldering iron and you just reheat it, and all the solder kind of reconnects, and the whole thing kind of restores itself. It's time consuming, but it works. And so I managed to get the original display, which barely worked, all fully working. The only thing, I took it apart, cleaned everything, so that it's not grubby anymore. It looks brand new and functions great. And the only thing that's not stock is the glass protector. I've got tempered glass over the front instead of plastic, so it won't scratch up as easily.
Oh, the lens, yeah.
And that's the one thing that really makes a massive difference. And so I've been running on that, and that the batteries are just starting to go. I put those in February, and we're in September.
Wow.
Yeah, it's astonishing. I think part of it is just how much better battery technology is these days. And just
you haven't like done any kind of mod to change its power, requirements.
I was going to, and in fact, I have on my next one. So for this basic one, it was just like, let's keep it as stock as possible. But I was going to put USB-C recharging in it, and when I realized how long the battery was lasting, I realized I've not needed to. And it's
because the batteries were good already. Back in the day, you would get a couple of days. Literally 48 hours or something crazy.
The manual says 15, and in terms of real world usage, you'd be going several days. With that. But now, I mean, I've gone from February playing every now and then, certainly every week, and it's still going. Like the light is just starting to fade, and it will play from an original cartridge, like Tetris, but if I use one, I've got an Easy Flash Junior with an SD card in it, and it's not able to power that anymore. So I'm just waiting to see how long these original batteries will go for before it just cuts out completely. But so far, we've gotten 3/4 through the year, and it's still going. And then That's next amazing. One, has been let's just get a backlight installed and get USB-C recharging in there, and especially as when you're powering a backlight, that's more power anyway. And then the next one, which is the one that I'm working on at the moment, is all the works. So new capacitors, replacing the power board, because that thing's very old and inefficient. So there's newer, more reliable technology for that there. Replacing the display with an IPS display, so everything's even sharper. So not just backlighting and biverting. And so
just completely replacing it, with a new module.
Yeah. The one thing I would say, though, is that doing that is a lot easier because you get the display board as its own separate board, and so you can just swap that out. When you're doing the backlight, you're having to remove the backlight layer from the LCD.
Yeah, you got to rip off. It's like a sticky, foily thing. You've done that then?
Oh, I was halfway through it, and I was just like, you know what? I'm never doing this again. This is horrible. It was painful, and I went through the whole thing. And I managed to put in the backlight, and it looked perfect until I realized there was actually a scratch on the glass. I thought, oh my God, have I scratched this? Have I scratched the top of the LCD panel? When I looked through the photos from my before photos, I realized it was actually there. so I hadn't done it, but it was damaged, so I had to go and get another display and do it. And I also put in a voltage regulator because I'd read that when you've got a backlight installed, it's not really designed for that amount of power. So this voltage regulator is supposed to help. And it did quite the opposite. It ended up with the backlight was flickering, and now it's dark in the upper right corner. So I may have actually blown something completely. And also, when I turned it on, within seconds, it was getting hot. I have never once felt a Game Boy overheat, and it was getting really hot to the point it was like, that is concerning.
So the voltage just got a little bit janky on that one with that mod.
Yeah, when I bought it, it says, they kind of went through instructions and they just had a picture of it, and they're just like, you use this at your own risk. And it was very clear to me that what I needed to do was basically just desolder the whole thing, remove it, and just go back to just having it as just the basic backlight for it.
So now if you wanted like a better screen, you can buy just a module that's an IPS panel, and you can just open up the Game Boy that you're wanting to work on and kind of basically just replace the module. There's not necessarily any kind of soldering or anything to do that.
You still need some soldering. There's still basic stuff for that for some things, but the mainly just if you're wanting to get a few other things, like there's some of them which will let you change the color of the backlight by sort of tapping the top. So there's other things that you can add. With a little force sensor and things for the backlight. Because you can change brightness and things like that with it. But typically, inside a Game Boy, you've got the main motherboard, which is where the processor is. It's where the cartridge slots into, and so on. Then there's the display board, and that has the display and the pads for all the buttons on the front. But that entire board, people just make a third-party replacement kit that has the IPS display already attached to that. So you're really just swapping out that entire board. And the rest, like the main part of the Game Boy, the actual computer part of it, is the other side of it. So those are the bits that are a little bit harder to source. If you're replacing that, you don't have a Game Boy anymore.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Yeah. You've made like something else.
That's it. Yeah. So I've got that, and then I've got some Game Boy Colors. I actually just restored one for a friend. She always wanted one of the teal, bluey green ones.
Right.
She's a vet, and it's kind of the same color as her scrubs, and that's always been her favorite color. So I helped restore that. I have one that I'm doing, which again is just a basic restoration for myself, and then there's one that's going to be all the works with again an IPS display that's a little bit larger, and I'm doing that one in the Pokemon Center orange and blue casing, because I just think it's a wonderful color matchup with it.
Yeah,
so it's a whole new shell, and it had like the Pokemon screen glass lens over the front with different Pokemon characters. You've got Charizard's tail is where the power LED is, so his tail lights up, which is quite smart.
Oh, that's really cool.
But that's smaller than the IPS display that I'm going to be putting in there. So
yeah, I've seen that Game Boy Color replacement screens. You often get a bit of a border around the edge. I think anybody's well, I guess maybe now then there's actually just full size displays that use the whole area.
Yeah, there's some the initial ones were actually smaller, so you ended up with an even smaller display. But yeah, now they've got ones that are bigger, and I didn't really need that. I was just liking the color for the front and the back, and I'm again just using tempered glass for one that's for this IPS. So I put that one on for her, and so she's now got one that looks brand new with this Pokemon front to it. That's the color that she wants, which is kind of neat. And then I've got an advance, really cool. Which I'm not doing multiple advances. I've got one advance, and that one is going to have a body that looks a lot like RoboCop. So you know RoboCop 2, where it's more of a very colored sheen, where depending on the angle, it's either blue or purple.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot bluer in the sequel, yeah.
Yeah, it's that. It looks exactly like that. So depending on how you hold it up in the light, it looks very much like RoboCop. And I was quite taken aback by it. They also make it for the original DMG as well. You can get that casing for it. And
kind of iridescent, whatever the word is, yeah.
Yeah, but it just seems like it suits the aesthetics of the Advance a lot more, just because it's I think just the shape of it, where it's just a little bit more rounded and curved, it just lends itself to that RoboCop vibe. But one thing that I'm still yet to do, and that is going to be on the Game Boy Color, because I've been looking at, you can get a Dremel and you can cut holes out for USB-C charging, or you can get panels that actually have the cutout already. But with the Game Boy Color, one thing I want to try is wireless charging, and just get a wireless charging coil and get all that kind of soldered in and stuff.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So you just place it on a QI sort of charging pad, and it will just charge.
Yeah. Just
cool.
yeah, you can get the actual charging coils themselves aren't that expensive. Having it all wired up, that's a little bit more tricky. But it doesn't look like it's too bad. One thing I have seen is, did you ever see the rechargeable battery packs that were available for the original Game Boy? It was
there were these big chunky things. Yeah, made it look pregnant.
Yes, yeah, and there's somebody that I've seen online, or actually a couple of people who have updated those with newer charging, and one of them put wireless charging in that as well, so you could wirelessly charge this battery pack that you could then plug into your Game Boy as well. And he's having to solder directly onto the battery cells. And
yeah, I've seen with laptops, because there's a lot of I've got a lot of like Apple PowerBooks, and the batteries are obviously failing. Yeah, and I've seen you probably know him as well, but the 8-bit guy, he actually did a video a few years ago where he was restoring the battery on an iBook, the clamshell G3, and it literally was just some AA cells that are all sort of like soldered together with a wire. And he actually did a battery rebuild, but it's not a very common job, and I'm not aware of anybody that does those really. But that's quite a cool thing.
Yeah, I watch those kind of things though, and it's just like, you know what? I don't want to die. That's I don't want to be responsible for my entire apartment catching fire. So that's my limit. That's what I'm not doing. I'm not going there. So I'll go as far as adding wireless charging, which will go to a board that's just going through the regular battery contacts. I'm not doing anything that requires soldering directly onto a battery. The only exception to that is replacing any dead battery cells in some of the original cartridges, because a lot of those battery save things have died by now. And so I've got a few of those, and those you're not really do directly onto the battery as such, but you're pretty close. But that is my limit. Oh, by the way, I played Tetris when I first got my Game Boy, and it wouldn't save my high scores, which is what prompted me to go, okay, well, let me order some batteries. Then they arrived, I opened it up. Turns out Tetris never had a battery in it.
But do you mean the original Game Boy game, or like one of the re-releases?
Yeah, it was in my head that you had the high score and it would save it. And whenever I turned my Game Boy off, it reset. And in my memory, I seem to just misremember that it would always keep the high score. It doesn't, because there's no battery inside.
No, they were quite expensive to put those sort of extra battery backup stuff in, so they were kind of just restricted to RPGs and very, very long-winded games. But I remember Super Mario Land 2 had a battery backup save, which was kind of made the game really easy. It wasn't in Tetris, but it's a game that kind of needs it, really, doesn't it? Because the whole idea is basically it's a score attack. So
you just kind of lose that, which I don't know. I don't know why I've always thought that it was able to do it. I think probably the first game I had that had a battery save was James Bond 007.
Yeah, it was quite a unique feature for consoles to be able to save your game in that way where there wasn't a password. I mean, I guess if you're playing Tetris and you're playing on an original Game Boy and you're using an Everdrive, if it's an Everdrive that could do save states like the Everdrive X7, and maybe the Easy Flash can.
As well.
Yeah. I've never actually tried. I want to get an Everdrive for my Game Boy that'll as an original DMG Game Boy Everdrive that will do save states, because the one I've got doesn't, and that will just open up so many games for me to be able to jump back in and out of if I did that. But I was going to get an Everdrive X7, but I've heard that I've got a Game Boy Advance Easy Flash, which you can play original Game Boy games on, because obviously it's a Game Boy Advance. But I just want to be able to do it on an actual real Game Boy original. I might have to look. I might have to look up the Easy Flash. But yeah, that's one way you could save your Tetris scores, if you just save a state, when you've had a session. Yeah.
One of my favorite memories of after I got my first Game Boy all done is I went on Amazon and I managed to buy some really old school 80s headphones. They weren't much. They were like
Right, yeah.
10 bucks, if that. It was the right amount of jank for the Game Boy. And I remember just sort of playing on it, and somebody at work kind of coming over to me and, just trying to get my attention and just talking as though there was noise canceling there. It's like, these are really cheap headphones. I can hear everything you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like I need a lot of bass fidelity or anything like that with them. And
I remember the headphones you got with were kind of like those classic, like they were like buds that you went in your ear, but they were sort of like really like boring, generic looking, like black. I think one side had a red band on it and one had a blue. Yeah.
There's a place locally nearby that actually has a pair of those still sealed in a little bag.
Oh my god.
That's cool. I was just like, no, I'll just get the headphones, because that's what I always played with. I didn't play with the earphones. I played with headphones. And
I used to always put my Game Boy back in the box after I finished playing with it, like the original retail box, and put the headphones back in. And you obviously got stereo sound, didn't you? The sort of sound chip was a little bit better than the NES on the Game Boy. So yeah, you got really nice. Well, the NES didn't do stereo at all, so it already had an advantage there. But yeah, it sounded really great through the headphones, really crisp. I mean, the chip tune music, there's some absolute classics, isn't there, on the Game Boy?
Yeah, play some of the Mario ones, or even Solar Striker has an amazing chip tune soundtrack. Really enjoyed that one on there as well. And there's a few other things that you can do, because there's a load of places, especially on Etsy. There's so many people building stands for these things, and so I ended up buying a stand just to display the Game Boy Advance, and it kind of floats, which is really neat. So
I mean, like just to display it on like your shelf sort of thing. Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to be doing with a lot of these, I think. But there's one interesting mod that I don't know if you've ever seen, but it's for the Game Boy SP, and the original ones were called Unhinged, and the latest one that I've seen is called the Slate. I don't know if you've seen any of those.
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, so where you've got the Game Boy Advance SP where it folds, this is one that's supposed to take it back to an original Game Boy style, where it's vertical and it's just a slab, so there's no folding involved. But what they're doing it's out of machined aluminium.
So you just completely replacing the case.
Yeah. But there's a lot. That one seems to be a little bit more challenging, because it's not just just pop one out and put it in. There's a lot of other stuff that you need to do, especially as it was originally designed to be on a hinge. And
you've got the L and R buttons will be a bit difficult to get to, I guess. Yeah.
So there's a whole different placement for those on the back. But as they've kind of gone with the unhinged, they had two different models. One of them was really chunky, and then as they've kind of gone down to the Slate, it's a lot thinner now. But it just kind of gives you that classic Game Boy feel, but with a later advance, which is really quite neat.
Yeah, because also the buttons. Probably like, well, I really like the GBA SP, because obviously it's nice to be able to fold it up and unfold it and all that stuff. You kind of protect the insides a little bit, but there is something to be said, especially if you play like original Game Boy games on it, which is obviously a great thing you could do, especially with like the SP AGS 101, which had a really nice backlit screen, which kind of holds up today, really. It works really well on that. But to play in that sort of slab candy bar kind of, or really thick candy bar style, is kind of would give you that original Game Boy sort of vibe, but on a Game Boy Advance. I think a lot of the mods they used to kind of concentrate on the original model, didn't they, of Game Boy Advance, the original kind of Game Gear sort of horizontal style, because obviously the screen was already kind of, even by 2001 standards, I think, when the Game Boy Advance came out, was already a little bit. Well, it wasn't backlit for starters. I mean, it already had handhelds several years prior to that were backlit. Obviously, they were concerned about battery life, weren't they, at the time?
Yeah.
So, I mean, have you worked on those at all, the originals?
So, well, that's the one that I'm wanting to do up to look like RoboCop.
Yeah.
That one, because that's going to be the biggest project of all of them, because pretty much everything is getting replaced in that, and full shell. Whole works. So that's something that I'm kind of keeping for a Christmas project for now.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting as well because I feel like it's really blown up over the last 2 or 3 years how like the parts being available for these upgrades. Because before it was about, again, when talking about the original Game Boy Advance, the horizontal one, it was about like
Yeah.
cannibalizing the screen from an SP,
Mm.
like an AGS 101. And obviously, there's do you really want to be doing that when no one's making these screens anymore, and you're kind of ruining what is already a very good GBA SP? Admittedly, to help another GBA, but I think I'd rather have just a third party make a screen. But I think there was kind of an absolute there was like no one doing that really up until about probably like 2017, 18, I would say. But now it seems like there's just, I mean, not necessarily from some of the most reputable places, like I'm sure AliExpress is probably a place where a lot of people buy these parts, and I'm sure some of them are fine. I'm not saying no one should trust AliExpress or anything, but I mean, is that where you find a lot of these screens and things like that? Where do you source a lot of this stuff?
I have been trying to go more for the bigger companies. There's certainly a lot that you can get from AliExpress, and the thing with that is you've got the Big Pro being a heck of it. Is a lot of it is cheap. Some places that you're getting are actually getting it from AliExpress as well themselves because they're just getting it imported from China.
Yeah,
But the quality varies wildly. So it depends what it is you're doing. Because I'm doing these like personally for myself, and because I'm just wanting to try and start in, as I'm kind of at the beginning of my journey with these,
yeah,
I want to see what good quality is like first, and then I can compare it to cheaper options where it's probably not not as problematic if something isn't working there. But
of course,
there's
yeah,
a surprising amount of places in the UK. Like the UK is quite a big scene for it. It's like so if you're in the UK trying to just get some of this stuff is actually a little bit cheaper. I'm in
oh,
Canada.
interesting.
Yeah, and most of it is in the US. So I have to pay extortionate import fees, which is the big problem. But I'd say that of some of the big places, there's Handheld Legend and the Retro Game Repair Shop. Those are both in the US. So that's where they ship from. There's Funny Playing, who make their own stuff. So Funny Playing are well known for their displays, their IPS displays, and there's a few other things that they do. That's where some of my shells are from. Most of their stuff sell through places like Handheld Legend and so on, but you
Okay,
can get directly from them. That ships from China directly, and that takes about a month for that stuff to arrive.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then for people like yourself in the UK, there's Retro 6, and Retro 6 are really, really good. But as they are in the UK, for me, like my first order was $40 just on the shipping. And
ouch.
so like the shipping prices was almost equaling the cost of the parts.
Sorry
But
about that.
that's, but they've got a good selection as well. So of those places, retro modding is probably my favorite. Retro modding is actually a company in Canada. They list all their prices in US dollars, and I think that's just because that's where the majority of their customer base comes from. But they're in Canada, so for me, it's pretty quick delivery and doesn't cost as much. So that tends to be my main port of call first, and then if I can't get something from there, I'll go to the others. And some of them will specialize in one type of thing that the others won't have. Some of them you'll find that they both do them, but I think recently, especially with the pandemic and all the shortages and supply chain issues, I've noticed that a lot of them will be sold out of certain things. So you can't always just go to one place and get all the stuff that you need. Sometimes it is literally just shopping around and
Yeah.
just seeing who's actually got stock of stuff. That at least that's my recent experience with it.
Have you been tempted? Obviously, you sort of focused on the Game Boy. I would say, sort of 1989 to 2004, five era. So covering that sort
Yeah,
of original Game Boy all the way up to the SP. Have you been
yeah.
tempted to sort of dive into perhaps like Nintendo DS and that era just after that? I'm not really aware of any huge mods for it, but is that something that you've been thinking about?
That might be later down the line. I mean, when it comes to trying to get donor ones of those, they're a little bit more on the pricey side, and
Yeah, yeah.
that certainly plays a huge factor into it.
The
Trying
original,
to
especially now, the sort of the original grey,
yeah,
silver clamshell. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a bit more valuable.
trying to get donor parts is the tough thing, and that's where I think getting donor consoles is easier in the UK. From everything that I see online, like there's a lot of them that are over there, and then the big place is Japan. There's a ton that you can get. If you look on eBay and you're just looking for damaged, ones that are just there for spares and repairs, you'll find a ton of different Game Boys there. But again, it cost me like $50 in shipping.
Game Boys and mini disc players. That's like the haven for it is Japan.
Yeah, but if you're looking at getting ones that are already in good condition, like if you're not worried about having to solder to fix things like some of mine, I've always tried to go for donors that have something wrong, so that because that's part of the fun for me is not just let's just clean it up or add to it. It's how do I fix an original issue? So there's one that has a display that doesn't work. I've got another one that has no sound. So there's a little bit of troubleshooting involved for me, which I find quite enticing. But if you're wanting to just get one that's in really good condition, Japan's actually a really good place for it because I think that on the whole, they look after their gear a little bit better, just as a culture. And,
I think so.
Yeah, and although I haven't done it, there's a guy called Elliot Cole. I can't remember his name exactly, but he's a big YouTuber for doing a lot of retro modding stuff, especially for Game Boys. And he goes through the Japanese version of Yahoo auctions. And
yeah, that's where they have they don't really use eBay, do they, in Japan? It's Yahoo where they do their auctions, Yeah,
and it uses a third-party company that basically he gets everything shipped from Japan to their warehouse. They just hold everything for him, and then he just gets it all shipped in one go. And so he can basically pay even though he's not in Japan. That's kind of how he gets around it. So obviously ends up adding a little bit of cost, but is probably cheaper and easier than any other method, especially as you can't even use the Yahoo auction otherwise without having.
Yeah, there's a great. I don't know if you know Techmoan on YouTube. Yeah, he does obviously reviews, mainly like audio stuff, but he does do like sometimes there's video game stuff. But he did a legendary video where he bought like 100 broken or junk mini disc players from Japan, but he used Buy, which is one of those sort of like courier services that you obviously you do it through them, and you win the auction on Yahoo auction through them, and then they repackage it up and post it out to you. So yeah, no, that's a really good way of doing it. So, what have you actually done that then? Have you actually got anything from Japan?
Oh no. I the ones I have gotten from Japan have just been through eBay. But again, eBay fees and just shipping costs mean that it's not something that I've done. I've only gotten like a couple of things from there. I do try and source locally when I can. Over here, we tend to have Kijiji and Facebook Marketplace are like the two places that are used most for local sales. So Craigslist and it isn't really used here, and Gumtree which is Kijiji is basically the Gumtree that you use in the UK.
Yeah, but it's you sort of mentioned buying stuff on eBay that's actually from Japan. Yeah, I've done that myself. I've been looking as well to get the fat PS3 models that we didn't get over here. The different colors. We just got the piano black one. Yeah. Just to add to the collection because I really like the PS3. They had like a silver color one in Japan. They had a white one, and they got a gunmetal gray Metal Gear Solid 4 fat PS3. We got none of those. We just got the black one. We didn't get different colors until the slim PS3. But they're not that expensive.
I think it was like that with the Game Gear as well, because they had like a white one over there, if I recall.
Yeah, they got a blue one, and they got a yellow one as well. They got the blue one in America, but we didn't get any of them.
Yeah, and this is the thing where you can get, you can just get a shell. So if you want that kind of look and style, like I was saying, I wanted the kind of Pokemon Center style one, which is they did two. They did one that was blue and yellow, and then one that was blue and orange. But the blue on that one is a really nice soft blue, and just complements against the orange really well. But I didn't like the Pokemon stuff on the front. So what I ended up doing was getting one of those replacement shells. And as I said, I was doing the IPS mod. So I got the front half of the shell, which was orange for that display. So I'm really only using
that's
the
cool.
back from the kit. So I'm kind of modding these together so that I have one that's just kind of clean without any kind of prints on it, but still has the color scheme that I'm wanting. So I'm kind of doing my own version of it in a way and getting the best of both worlds. And so you can kind of do that. There'll be people who will mix and match like the front with the back. There's a lot of people that do some really cool UV printing. So you can have all sorts of wacky designs. There's ones that look very reminiscent of Saved by the Bell and that kind of style.
Right, yeah.
Very kind of 90s, streamers and all kind of things all over the front of it. Ones that look like, pink donut with sprinkles like Homer Simpson would eat. I've seen all sorts of really cool designs, and then ones from a ton of RPGs, like with those kind of figures on there. So that's one of the great things with modding is it's not just, how do you add new features? How do you fix something that, otherwise would just end up in the trash? There's a lot of people who just put their own stamp on it with their own style, depending on what's out there.
Yeah, I've been tempted, like when they're going beyond like the Game Boy, and we've mentioned the Game Gear. I've been tempted to sort of pull the trigger on buying some a pre-modded Game Gear. I've got a couple of Game Gears. One is my one from when I was a kid, and the caps have gone, so it doesn't you can't really play anything on it at all. I've still got it though, in the hopes that one day I'll either pay someone to redo it, or I'll just try and maybe be brave enough and do it myself. I've got one that is in worse condition, but has been recapped.
Oh, okay, yeah. And like we said before, that's the biggest problem with those Game Gears is that the caps.
Oh yeah,
and that's a big thing with the industry at the time anyway. Is the capacitors would just fail left, right, and center at the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something to bring with you then when you come to visit Canada.
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's some work you could do for me.
Yeah. We'll sit down.
Put the Game Gear on the table. Yeah. Yeah, but so there's that potentially, or just buying a pre-modded one. I would like one with one of those really nice sort of LED screens that are super bright and clear, and obviously absolutely destroy the original screen that was famous for how blurry it was and everything. We all got by at the time, but yeah.
There's a few really good comparison videos on YouTube that just show you the before and after, and it's just the difference is night and day. Because all the ghosting that you got. All that blurring was awful on those original screens, and they would, even though they were backlit, they were kind of dull. It wasn't really that well lit.
No, and obviously that caused the battery to drain, and the new LED screens obviously aren't. All 6 of them, yeah. The new screens obviously don't need as much power, so the batteries last longer. The same, I've got a Sega Nomad, which I really enjoy actually using because it's just a cool, you're able to play, Mega Drive games, on. I know you can do that. You can mod a PS Vita or a PSP or any kind of a handheld, a Steam Deck. You can play Mega Drive games on a handheld, but there's something to be said about playing on an actual bit of authentic Sega hardware from the 90s. Yeah. We didn't get the Nomad in the UK; it was only in the US. But I got one that was already in the UK for a decent price, and it's a great bit of kit. But yeah, 6 batteries and this weird bulky battery pack that you jack into the back of it. So it's not even, inside the actual main unit at all. There's an extra little thing that it needs. It's actually quite, it's not too uncomfortable to hold. But yeah, even now they've got some amazing mods and brilliant screens. Just as a last thing before we finish up, have you thought about, we touched upon other handhelds, but is there, home consoles that perhaps you've been tempted to, look at modding, maybe just to repair them, getting the caps done, or just to make them, get better video outputs on some of them, those sort of things. Have you been tempted with home consoles?
There's a couple of things. So I've got a Radofin Sports console. It's basically from the 70s. It's a Pong clone. And that is working great, except one of the controllers is a little stiff. So I'm not really going to be doing anything to the console itself, because that's great. But the controller, which is hardwired in, it's not one that you can unplug, that will need a little bit of love and care. And I also managed to find the gun for it as well, the light gun. Now,
for
whatever reason, it doesn't work. Now, that might be because I'm using a little small portable CRT television. So it's a CRT. So in theory, it should work. But I don't know if it's just an issue with the size of the screen versus what it would be expecting, which would be something a bit larger, or if there is something that's failed, which, given that this console is from the 70s, wouldn't surprise me. So that's something that I'm
Yeah.
probably going to look into at some point. Right now, the gun doesn't even work, so there's not much risk there. The other thing is that I got some of the controllers from 8-Bit Do. I've had a few of them for a while. They're fantastic
they're great, yeah.
Bluetooth controllers. Yeah, I've got one that's the NES one. I've got one for the Super Nintendo that was the British designed one or the Japanese one. Basically, that color scheme. And I recently
the
found
different colors and not the purple and
yeah, look like M&Ms basically on it, which is
Yeah.
that's the style we grew up with. So that's the one that I love most. But I managed to find a second one, which is the North American version with the 2 shades of purple for the buttons on the side.
Which I weirdly like. I do like those 2 shades of purple and the concave and convex buttons, which I don't think we got at all on ours. They're all convex. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And so, and I also think that for 2-player games, it's interesting to kind of for me to be playing with the European controller and then for them to be playing with the North American one. I think it amuses me because I'm easily amused. But anyway, I got this in the shop and they gave a warranty on it. It's like 15-day warranty or something like that. And I got it home and it wouldn't work. It wouldn't charge. And I opened it up and saw that the USB port has been ripped right from the board. So it's not plugged in at all.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, well, there's no point in taking it back because 1, there was nothing else to replace it with. It would basically just be getting a refund. And 2, it's like, well, you know what? That's something that now that I've started this whole soldering thing, I might be able to fix one day. Now, we're talking a completely different scale. So when we're looking at Game Boys, being from the 80s, the components are a lot larger. So this is more micro soldering than anything.
Yeah,
so that's something that I'll be working myself towards. That one, I'll probably need to get one of those electronic digital microscopes to be able to work on that one. And AliExpress will definitely be sourcing a new port for it. But there's going to be a lot of redoing a lot of the contacts on the board itself. So that one's probably going to be the biggest challenge. But that's one that I'm kind of interested in trying out. But of course, that's where some of the complexity comes in as well, because at least as one final point, with the original Game Boys having been around so long, getting schematics for them is not difficult. There's a lot of documentation. You can get the entire layout for how everything works. When it comes to something more proprietary like 8-Bit Do's controllers, that stuff's not available. So a lot of it is just going to be trying to figure it out from just looking at the thing.
Makes sense. So. Yeah. Oh, that would be cool. Controllers, they're really, really satisfying to clean as well. I like doing that myself. It's funny because there's a console that I've been wanting to get for a long time, and that's the Atari 5200, the sort of failed 1982 Atari console that was kind of the next generation from the 2600, but they never released them in the UK. And their controllers were famous for breaking because they're like analog controllers and they don't self-center. And they just break. So if I bought one, it would probably be broken. There are ways to fix them, I think, but actually just getting a console will be a mission because again, they weren't out over here.
Just reminded me as well. You know how they re-released the Commodore 64 as a little mini console?
Yeah.
And they released the joystick, so you could get it with the joystick, or you could get the joystick separately, which was based on the old zip sticks.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I picked up one of those. They're rubbish. They're absolutely rubbish. The click doesn't feel right. There's no weight to them, so you don't feel that weightedness to it. There's no suction cup, so you can't stick it to the desk like you used to. So it just does not have that authentic feeling at all. But it works on my Mac. So that's the pro and the con. And I've seen a few online where like the cables are ruined and things. And I'm kind of thinking, you know what I could do? I could try getting an original zip stick that's not working and see if I can just take the internals out from this new one and just kind of gut the original and just kind of put it across so I can basically make one that is USB, but is the original one. Otherwise, failing that, trying to just make a converter that goes to USB as well.
That's a great idea.
That's a project for a future day as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So, hopefully,
and kind of to your point earlier, sometimes it's just the buttons and how they feel. Having the Game Gear or having one of these controllers, the physical sensation, the tactile feel of them is as much a part of nostalgia as the games themselves.
Yeah, and to be
And
honest, we don't even know what they felt like when they were brand new, because that was a very short period of time at the beginning of their use, and we're used to probably ones that are quite mushy now by comparison, right? Getting a lot of people, it was a revelation when they played like the Super Nintendo Mini or the NES Mini with a brand new recreation of the NES controller. They were like, oh my god, this feels so clicky and like new, and there's. We all forgot what that felt like. I mean, I'm not sure if you can replace the parts and just swap out the shell and everything. You probably can't, because obviously the board would be different inside. But that's controllers are always fun. I like working on those myself and cleaning them. It's very therapeutic.
Absolutely, yeah. I've definitely had that experience too.
Yeah. Okay. So Al, where can we find you on the interwebs these days?
I'm on Twitter at Alistair McFly, and I also stream on Twitch. I've been taking a bit of a break recently, but I will be returning shortly to playing some Minecraft on there over at Alistair McFly on Twitch too.
Cool. And we've been Console Shock, and you can find us on Twitter. We're at Console Shock UK. On YouTube, just search Console Shock. All of the podcast catchers, I think we're definitely on Stitcher or on iTunes, or the podcast app on Apple. Again, just search Console Shock, and we have a website, consoleshock.net, and a Facebook page. And again, just search for Console Shock. So thanks a lot, Al, for jumping on again. It's been really interesting with it just being me and you. I think it's a bit of a different experience, but also familiar, because obviously we do this together anyway in our other show. So what is our other show?
Long Range Sensors, which you can find at longrangesensors.com and on all your usual podcasting platforms too.
Cool. So yeah, if you can't get enough of just me and Al talking, you can catch us on there as well. So thank you everybody for checking out the latest episode of Console Shock. Take care, and we will see you in the next one. See you later.
Bye.